I thought I knew her. I thought I understood us. But secrets, they have a way of unraveling love from within, don't they? The scent of her perfume used to fill the room with warmth, but now it suffocates me. Every time I close my eyes, I see him, his hands on her where mine used to be. God, I didn't even realize I was letting it happen. It wasn't just the cheating, it was the lies that followed, the ones I swallowed like poison each and every night. Now, all that's left is the wreckage and the harsh truth that shattered me. I could have imagined my life ending in a plane crash, something that happens to many people, especially those like me who travel frequently for work, flying over oceans and lands in search of oil. Those who work in the oil industry often find themselves dealing with difficult and dangerous characters in far-flung places. I could have faced a serious illness, too. My father lost his battle with lung cancer at the age of 57. He was a strong man, hard-working and full of life, until the cancer took him. He had only smoked a few cigars, and the doctor said it was more likely due to the harmful chemicals he encountered while working in the oil industry. In the end, it wasn't just the cancer that took him. When he became very weak, I reluctantly honored his wish and took him to the airfield in western Jacksonville, where his small plane was waiting. I helped him into the cockpit, and he hugged me tightly. "Give 'em hell, son," he said, his voice steady. Then, without waiting for clearance, he took off into the skies. The next day, they found the wreck of his plane in the Atlantic, about 10 miles from Jacksonville Beach. They never found him. He would have wanted to leave this world on his own terms, not while hooked up to machines, gasping for breath. In the days that followed, I joined some friends at a local bar called O'Brien's. O'Brien had known my dad for 20 years, and along with some of our old friends, we raised a glass to celebrate his life and the way he chose to live it. You might think I expected to face the wrath of a jealous partner, but I wasn't proud of my past actions as a young man. I entered relationships without fully considering how they would affect others. Whether someone was married or single didn't bother me much back then. Now that I was married, I sometimes regretted how I may have hurt others, including men, in a way I would never want to be treated myself. At the time, I simply didn't think about the consequences of my choices. What I didn't expect was what life truly had in store for me. I was 25 when I met someone who changed everything. She had beautiful red hair that flowed like flames, and her slender figure was both delicate and captivating. Her fair skin was so soft that you could see the light veins beneath it, and a sprinkle of freckles danced across her nose. I could easily picture her in an advertisement, joyfully running through a sun-drenched green field in Ireland, her bright hair glowing in the sunlight. Everything about her radiated gentleness and beauty, but she also had a powerful presence. Her bright smile and warm laughter drew people in. She caught everyone's attention as she walked into a room. It was 7 in the morning at Augustine's big house by the water when I first laid eyes on her. I was with 2 female friends who were struggling to stay upright, wearing outfits that left little to the imagination. Even though she was cheerful, I found her a bit too thin and young for my liking. I preferred different company. She was the only daughter of Orion Niche Lancaster, the founder of Oil Incorporated, a major independent oil company that competed with the local Gate Petroleum Company. While Gate Petroleum raked in profits from retail oil, Oil Incorporated focused on finding and supplying oil to various clients. Lancaster's wealth paled in comparison to the billionaire owners of Gate, yet she was the sole heir to a fortune of $250 million. Her father was fiercely protective of her. My father had worked for Lancaster for 10 years before he passed away, and they shared a strong friendship, having grown up in the oil business. I admired Lancaster greatly. His daughter was seen as a blessing, especially given the struggles he faced before her birth. His second marriage had ended badly because he had a son who wasn't his biological child, prompting legal measures to safeguard his fortune. From a young age, I often traveled with my father to oil fields, where he taught me about the industry. As long as my grades were good, I could tag along, and that sparked my interest in the business. He helped ease my mother's worries by sharing that he had a similar childhood. My dad was a caring father and husband, but he had grown up in the rough-and-tumble oil fields of Oklahoma and Texas. He never thought there was anything wrong with a boy learning about things like alcohol and cigars. He set boundaries with dating, knowing he would eventually have to answer to my mother, but he couldn't always keep an eye on me. Once, while fishing on the western coast of Mexico, I met an 18-year-old girl who caught my attention. She had dark hair and a lively spirit that was impossible to ignore. I was 13 at the time, and we spent 2 wonderful weeks together, which ignited strong feelings in me. However, those feelings faded quickly when she became interested in a 20-year-old man who had just returned from a fishing trip. Luckily, at 13, it was easy to move on. I grew tall and sturdy, like my father, and shared his love for spirited people and ambition. My dad became a millionaire 3 times before I turned 10, only to lose all his money each time, which is why he ended up working for Oil Incorporated. By the age of 25, I had worked in various locations, from Canada to Mexico, Indonesia, and Africa. I spent more time away from home than I did there, but I had earned my diploma and started building my career in the oil industry. Little did I know that the path ahead would twist and turn in ways I could never have anticipated, leading me to a crossroads that would challenge everything I believed about love, loyalty, and myself. I was doing well in my career, earning a good income and enjoying the company of many interesting people. My life felt vibrant, full of potential, until the day I met Deirdre Lancaster. The first time I saw her, she stumbled into her father's expansive home. At first glance, I didn't think much of it. She looked a bit unsteady and spoke with a slight slur. Her friend, dressed in a flashy outfit, made a surprising comment about me, but Deirdre seemed to be in a bad state. With the help of the staff, they quickly headed upstairs to get sorted out. I had come for dinner with Mr. Lancaster to discuss business, contemplating how to leverage the evening for new opportunities. Just as I was lost in thought, Mr. Lancaster approached me from behind. "Michael, could I speak with you for a moment?" he asked, his voice warm yet serious. I had always liked him. He paid me well for my work and was genuinely a good guy. I could sense he was looking for something specific, but I was ready to engage. "Sure," I replied, following him into one of the home's libraries. This was one of the luxuries that set wealthy people apart. They had multiple spaces dedicated to relaxation and conversation. Mr. Lancaster settled into a cozy leather chair, motioning for me to sit across from him. "I'm sorry you had to see Deirdre like that," he began, his tone heavy with concern. "She's really a good girl. She lost her mother when she was just 10, and I've tried my best to find her nice friends and caretakers, but nothing can truly fill that void. She's become a bit wild, and her friends aren't much better." "No need to apologize," I replied, remembering my own reckless days. "I haven't always been the best either, as I'm sure my dad has told you. The difference, Michael, is that he respected your youthful adventures," Mr. Lancaster said, shaking his head. "No parent wants to see their child in a bad way. I can see there's a difference." After a moment of silence, he continued, "They tell me you have some trips planned to South America soon." I nodded, thinking back to my work with Oil Incorporated. Like my father, I didn't have anyone constantly overseeing my movements. I was sent on assignments when the higher-ups requested it, but I also had the freedom to explore. "I've found 2 significant oil fields already," I shared. "One is in Cuban waters and is being quietly set up for a deal between Cuba and Britain, with Oil Incorporated as a silent partner. Yes, I think there's a major field waiting to be explored in the Brazilian rainforest. Of course, making it work will require effort to navigate opposition, but I believe the oil is there." He leaned in, clearly intrigued. "I appreciate your hard work, Michael, and I trust your instincts just as I do your father's. But I need to ask you for a favor." "A favor?" I raised my eyebrows, showing both my confusion and the weight of the request. "This isn't just about business, it's personal." Mr. Lancaster's expression shifted to something more serious. "There are others interested in the oil in the rainforest, Michael. The Russians and the Chinese are well known, but the Saudis are also looking for opportunities. Some members of their royal family realize their oil supplies won't last forever. They need to control resources around the world to maintain their power. We're in a good position now because we've built ties with the Brazilian government and reached out to some local groups, but this is just the beginning. We could lose our chance. He placed his weathered hand gently on my knee. Even though he wore a suit, the marks of his past were evident, including the loss of a finger while building his company. I understand what you're saying, and I've talked to people about your work there, he continued. I know what I'm asking and the risks involved. But I'm asking you to stay here in Jacksonville for a few weeks, maybe a month, while my daughter is on break from the University of Florida. She graduated from high school early and has always been a top student. She's taking some time off from graduate school but should finish her MBA within the year. With the right support in Gainesville, she can focus better, but she has too much free time here. And how does this involve me? I asked, trying to grasp the connection. She is very smart and strong-willed, and people notice her, he explained. Some try to befriend her because of my connections. She's clever and can sway most of the staff I assigned to her. Often, she finds ways to mislead those meant to help her. I shook my head, incredulous. You want me to pause this oil project so I can look after your daughter? He nodded, a serious look on his face. I believe this oil deal could bring great rewards for the company, but I'll always have resources, no matter what happens in Brazil. There will be other oil opportunities, but I have only one daughter. I tried one last time, speaking with all due respect. Mr. Lancaster, you know I respect you, but this isn't a good idea. I'm not a caregiver. There are many people who could better support your daughter and help her stay safe. He squeezed my hand gently. I know that, Michael, but you have special qualities that not everyone has. I'm listening. First of all, you're almost like family to us, he continued, his voice earnest. I know I pay you, but you grew up in this company. I've known you since you were little. Like your father, you're loyal, not just because of the money. You're a good person, just like him. I can trust you, and I do. You're quite the adventurer, he added, leaning back in his chair. I know you've had to leave more than a few places. I know you found yourself in tricky situations that needed fixing. There have been times when you needed help with the authorities. You've had your struggles, but you've always managed to come through. You're a strong guy who knows how to stand up for himself, and that counts for a lot. I was taken aback by his words. So far, all we've got is that you like me and I have a habit of getting into trouble. Not exactly the best recommendation. That's true, he conceded. But it helps to know that Deirdre has always thought highly of you, even if... He paused, and I could see the concern etched on his face. Even if she's been through a lot. I just need someone to keep an eye on her while she finds her footing. You could make a real difference. As I sat there, weighing his words, I felt the gravity of the situation. Deirdre was a bright young woman with potential, but I wasn't sure I was the right person to guide her through this tumultuous time. Yet, Mr. Lancaster's faith in me was hard to ignore. I'll think about it, I finally said, realizing that this was more than just a simple favor. This was about trust, family, and the complexities of life. Thank you, Michael, he replied, relief flooding his features. I truly believe you can help her, and, in turn, help us all. She'd be upset if she knew I mentioned it, I thought, holding back a chuckle. Mr. L, I said, to be honest, I barely even noticed she was around until tonight. He smiled knowingly. I understand. You've been busy, and she is younger. Even though she's grown up now, I get that she might not fit your usual type. That does make me feel a bit better, knowing she doesn't quite match your preferences. But trust me, she's noticed you for quite some time. I've seen her looking at you when she thought you weren't paying attention. A few of her friends have said she's been pretty open about her feelings for you. I shook my head, feeling a mix of confusion and reluctance. Now I really don't know if I want to do this. He grinned, a mischievous glint in his eye. You're not afraid of a few challenges or tricky situations. But a 20-year-old college student makes you hesitant. It's not the same thing, I replied, trying to defend my position. I know, but I trust you. I believe you can handle it. Are you ready for this? What could I say to that? So instead of flying over the jungles of Brazil the next Friday night, I found myself stepping into Pelicans, a new bar and dance spot on Jack's Beach. Deirdre was there with 3 of her friends and 4 guys who looked like they were fresh out of college. Their stares felt like those of overly cautious uncles, scrutinizing me as if I were some threat to their fun. I ordered a round of drinks and started chatting with Deirdre's friends, an easy way to blend in. One of the more outgoing girls and I hit it off, and when she dared me to dance, I accepted the challenge. Deirdre moved gracefully on the dance floor, her outfit catching the light as she twirled. Honestly, when you look like her and wear something so eye-catching, all you have to do is sway a little, and nobody, not even the guys, would mind. But when she started inching closer to me, I felt a rush of protectiveness. I'm worried about the boss's daughter, I thought. I can't just leave her alone while I'm not at work. I made an excuse to step off the dance floor, hoping to clear my head a bit. When I returned from the restroom, I spotted her talking to a tall young man in the corner who looked far too comfortable with her. I quickly moved back to Deirdre's table, only to find her surrounded by 4 guys laughing and teasing her, empty shot glasses and wine glasses littering the table. She appeared more intoxicated than they were, and that worried me. Looking around, I noticed her 2 female friends had vanished into the crowd. I didn't like the direction this was heading. I pulled up a chair next to her, casting a sharp look at the closest guy who was getting too friendly. Deirdre, you look a bit out of it, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Let me take you somewhere quiet for some coffee and fresh air. You'll feel better, and we can come back later. How does that sound? She lifted her head and squinted at me. Do I know you? You're tall and dark. Are you my chaperone tonight? Thanks, but my friends will take care of me, right, guys? A confident blonde guy squeezed her arm, making her jump a bit. He shot me a mocking smile. Yeah, we've got her covered. We'll make sure she gets home safe. His friends shared similar smirks, as if daring me to step in. Only one guy, who seemed calm and strong with mixed features, stayed neutral in the background. Deirdre let her head drop onto the table. I shook her shoulder gently, but she didn't respond. It was clear she wasn't fully aware of what was happening, and despite her drunkenness, I had a sinking feeling it wasn't just the alcohol. I could call for help, but I needed to confront those around her first. I wanted to avoid dragging in outside authorities if I could help it. I stood up to help her, but she just slumped back down. Discreetly, I signaled for a waiter, slipping a $100 bill into his pocket when he approached. This is Deirdre Lancaster, the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the city, I explained. He's very protective, and I'm her bodyguard. If anyone tries to leave with her, tell management to call her father and the authorities. She could use some help right now. I'm stepping outside with these 3 gentlemen for a moment to talk, but I'll be back soon. As I walked ahead of the 3 guys, who were animatedly discussing their plans for when we got outside, I kept my eye on one of them. He stayed quiet, though, as I moved. Just then, I felt someone behind me and turned slightly, catching the arm of a guy who was trying to hit me. With a quick motion, I sidestepped him, sending him crashing face first onto a wooden crate that had once held valuable bottles. I couldn't tell if the cracking sound came from the crate or him, but either way, he didn't fight back. He lay there, looking upset and bewildered. The other 2 guys quickly moved in. The first one swung wildly, stumbling past me in his awkwardness. The second one approached, raising his hand to throw a punch, but I was quicker. I poked him in the eye. He gasped, his breath catching in his throat, making it hard for him to block my next blow. I kicked him hard, but to my surprise, he stayed on his feet. However, the second kick sent him rolling onto his back in the alley, gasping for air as he struggled to recover. "I'm going to make you regret this," the third guy shouted, steadying himself and rushing at me. "Sure, but I won't be accepting any drinks from you, so this might be tougher for you," I shot back, dodging his punches effortlessly. We could keep this little game going all night, but I worried about the Polynesian guy stepping in or that their friends might show up. So, I moved in closer, preparing for whatever came next. He charged at me, attempting to take me down with a wrestling move. As he lunged, I spun around to regain control. If someone is behind you holding on tight, it's often best to go with the flow and find a way to escape. Throwing them over your shoulder can be risky, especially if they aren't ready to let go. I remembered a few practice matches where a similarly reckless move was attempted against me. I managed to react just in time, but this guy surprised me and threw me over his back. I didn't hear anything strange, but it was clear he was in a lot of pain. Glancing around, I saw the Polynesian kid approaching, and I focused entirely on him, staying relaxed and ready to move. I watched his face, waiting for the next move. Especially his eyes, which seemed to reflect the plans swirling in his mind. "Are we going to fight?" I asked, trying to gauge his intentions. "You've had some practice," he replied casually. "A little in the gym, but mostly from real-life experiences." I nodded, remembering my own training. "I've been practicing karate and judo since I was 4, thanks to my dad. Eventually, I found that I really enjoyed it." He looked impressed. "I've never faced someone with your skill level, but every fight is a new experience." He sized me up with an assessing gaze. "I think I can take you, but you're skilled enough that we might end up hurting each other." I took a step back, a protective instinct kicking in. "Your idea of fun is very different from mine. Putting someone in a tough spot like this isn't entertaining. I can have fun without hurting anyone. I feel sorry for anyone who thinks otherwise." I noticed his friends were visibly upset by our exchange. "No matter what happens, the authorities will be notified. I've already let others know what's going on, and if things escalate, the police will arrive quickly. If her family hears about this, they won't need the police to handle the situation." He knelt beside Bobby, who was still reeling from the pain. "Bobby, hold on. Just take a deep breath and try to relax." After a moment, he gently lowered Bobby to the ground. After a while, Bobby lifted his head and said quietly, "What did you do?" "That feels better. I just helped ease some of your pain. We need to get you to an emergency room. The closest one is probably at the beach." Bobby looked at me, a mix of concern and gratitude in his eyes. "Take care of that guy, Mo. I can wait." Mo gave me a serious look before turning back to his friend. "I think the police will be here soon, and I don't want to get caught up in any trouble. Also, her dad is a powerful man. I don't want to mess with him." "Are you scared of this guy, Mo?" "I've never seen you back down before," I challenged. "I'm not scared," he replied, his voice steady. "But your arm is hurt, and it can still heal. If he hadn't let go, it could have been worse. You still have a future. If I do something careless tonight, all my hard work could vanish. Is it worth it? You're risking everything for someone who isn't worth it. You might be okay with throwing everything away, but I'm not." Mo turned to me, a mix of appreciation and frustration in his eyes. "I appreciate what you did for Bobby. Let's just walk away from this." I stared at him, trying to wrap my head around his perspective. "No hard feelings? You were about to make a big mistake, and you think I should just forget it? That's not going to happen. I'm waiting for the cops. If you want to try to stop me, go ahead. You might not be as tough as you believe." He shook his head, his expression resolute. "You don't know the whole story, do you? You think we were planning something worse? Well, yeah. Go ask the staff. There's more happening here than you realize." "What do you mean?" Some of the staff will tell you she's been in situations like this before. She made her choices, and we're just part of that. It's not what you think. Bobby has a father who has helped both Republican and Democratic governors for 20 years. He won't let Bobby take the blame for this and has enough influence to cause problems for her family. Do you really want to call the police instead of just letting us go? You could take her somewhere to help her feel better and come up with a story her father would believe. I knew that if he wasn't telling the truth, it would be easy to find out. But it seemed smarter to get her away from here and out of trouble with the authorities. Take your friends and leave. I'll let this go unless I find out your story isn't true. You seem smart enough to know that this type of situation won't end well. No matter how rich Bobby's father or anyone else is, even if this is just a joke, one small mistake, an overdose or a bad reaction, could lead to serious problems. You don't need to get caught up in this. He bent down to help Bobby to her feet. You look after your friend, and I'll take care of mine. I walked back into Pelicans and saw Deary at a table in the back, her head resting on it. A couple of waiters approached, one of them asking, "Police?" "No, we'll handle this ourselves." I shook her gently, but she just moved her head and mumbled. I couldn't tell if she was pretending or if she had taken something. I handed her my parking slip and, with some effort, lifted her over my shoulder as if she were a child. My main concern was that she might feel sick. Luckily, she didn't, and I got her to my Jeep Cherokee. The attendant opened the passenger door for me, and I settled her inside. Next, I found a motel on Atlantic Boulevard, away from the beaches. After stopping at a 24-hour coffee shop for 3 large coffees and 2 Big Macs at a nearby McDonald's, I entered the motel room, locking the door behind me. I sat on one of the 2 double beds beside her. Her bright curls spread around her on the pillow, so vivid they looked almost unreal. She was softly snoring, her small chest rising and falling, and between snores, I could hear bits of words. Even though she wasn't usually my type, something about her caught my attention. Her skin was pale, adorned with freckles like delicate paper, and I noticed the gentle patterns beneath the surface. The only light in the room came from the table lamp beside her bed. Under its soft glow, she appeared almost magical, like something out of a dream. I usually preferred my company to be steady and real, but there was no denying she was an interesting woman if that's what you liked. "Deary," I said softly, patting her cheek. She blinked after a moment and managed to open her eyes. I wasn't sure if she could see me, but she looked at me and said, "Bobby?" "No, Bobby's gone. I sent him away." She blinked a few times, her confusion evident. "You hurt Bobby?" "Not as much as I could have, but yes, I did." "You shouldn't have done that." "I'm sorry, but when I see someone in danger, it really bothers me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I had no idea you all were throwing a party like this." She attempted to lift her head, but it flopped back onto the pillow. "I feel dizzy," she murmured, her eyes fluttering shut. Sometimes college students get into trouble when they mix strong drinks. Sometimes it turns out fine. And sometimes it doesn't. I crossed my arms, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "I still think you're being inconsiderate. I could have managed it, maybe, but what if something went wrong? Your dad has someone keeping an eye on you, and it would be nice to have a warning so I don't end up in a tough spot." As she lay back, breathing slowly, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. "You're not going to feel sick, are you?" I asked, my concern creeping into my tone. With her eyes still closed and her breath shallow, she replied, "I don't think so." I perched on the edge of the bed, propping her up a little. "You know, it's easier to drink hot coffee sitting up. I think you could really use some right now." "I don't want any," she protested weakly. "Trust me," I insisted. "Hot coffee can help with a lot of things." I picked up a steaming cup of black coffee and held it to her lips. She spit it out. "That's hot." "Exactly. Blow on it a little to cool it down, then take a sip." After a couple of tries, She finally managed to swallow a decent amount, but then she grimaced and spit it out again. "Who drinks coffee black?" she complained. "I do. Sometimes it helps clear your mind. Just try a little more. I'm going to tell my dad you took me to a motel room while I was drunk. He won't be happy with you," she threatened, a hint of mischief in her eyes. I held the coffee to her lips again. "Two things: he won't blame me when I explain what really happened. He might just keep a closer eye on you. And even if he gets upset, I can find work anywhere. Oil companies don't care about threats. You think you're clever, don't you?" She shot back, her expression playful yet defiant. Before I could respond, she splashed hot coffee in my direction without thinking. "Hey," I exclaimed, gently pushing her back. She looked at me, surprised, and I noticed a small cut on her lip. "I can't believe you did that. People don't throw hot coffee at me, no matter who they are." Her eyes widened for a moment, and I couldn't help but chuckle. "You're being unreasonable," I said, but my tone softened. I went to the bathroom, returned with a damp cloth and some tissues, and began cleaning her cut. "Are you okay?" I asked, genuinely worried. "I'll be fine," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "But I shouldn't have thrown coffee at you. I'm sorry." She reached up, wiping some of the coffee off my cheek with an apologetic smile. "Drink some water and rest a bit. We need to make sure you're all right. If you feel better, a small meal might help." "I don't know if I can eat. I just want to rest." "I just want you to try," I insisted. "You should probably see a doctor." This was reckless. "I'll be okay." "You always say that, but it doesn't mean it's true," she shot back, her tone defensive. "Mo told me you've done this before. Is this what you call partying?" "I'm an adult, and I can make my own choices," she replied, crossing her arms defiantly. "Is this really how you want to live? Putting yourself in risky situations?" She fell silent, and I found it hard to believe she was willingly making these choices. "Your decisions are your own, but it's hard to watch you go down this path," I said, my concern bleeding through. "What you think doesn't matter to me," she retorted, but I could see the hint of uncertainty in her eyes. After a few quiet moments, she finally picked at some food I had set aside, and she seemed to feel a bit better. "You felt something when you carried me earlier, didn't you?" she asked, breaking the silence. "That was just a normal reaction," I replied, brushing it off. "It wasn't about you." "Sure," she said, shaking her head. "How many people have you been with?" "That's not your concern," I replied tersely. "I overheard our fathers talking about some of the things you've done," she said, a hint of amusement creeping into her voice. "I know you've made mistakes. I've heard more stories than I'd like." "Don't bother answering. I can see it in your face. You've had some interesting times, haven't you?" "What I've done is my business," I shot back, but the tension was dissipating. She stood up beside the bed, still holding her coffee cup. "Just so you know, it's the 21st century. People make their own choices, and I can live my life however I want. I'm responsible for myself, but I'd prefer my father not to know about some of my choices. He still sees me as his little girl, and he wouldn't like it." "I should tell him anyway to make sure you stay safe," I warned. "This kind of life could lead to real trouble. Why not settle down and find someone steady?" She moved closer, looking directly at me. "Could I see your driver's license?" "What?" I asked, taken aback. "I think you might be older than you seem. You have that old soul feeling," she said, an intrigued smile on her face. I placed my hands on her shoulders, gently moving her back, but hesitated. She noticed my hesitation and smiled wider. "Maybe I could try to be responsible," she said, "but I know enough about you to see that you have your own past." "So, how many?" "Who knows? Who cares?" "Exactly. People do what they want, but somehow, I'm judged differently. I guess that's just how it is." I didn't let it bother me. It felt natural, like sitting in a hotel room with someone well respected. Not that it's any of your business, I said, but I get tested regularly, and I always take precautions. My father taught me responsibility, and I haven't caused any issues for a long time. Have you ever thought about all those little McCarthys that could be around if your father hadn't helped you so quickly? Or if you had taken responsibility for your actions? Have you ever thought about what it would be like to be a parent? If you had more than just your looks, she added, her eyes searching mine. Those words struck a nerve, and I could feel my frustration building. Those words don't hold much weight coming from someone who has lived so freely, I shot back. A small smile appeared on her face, and it only fueled my irritation. I think I might have hit a nerve, she said, her voice teasing. Mr. McCarthy, she continued, do you ever think about things during those long nights? Many women often worry about the thought of children who will never come to be. Men usually don't worry about that. Real men don't. I'm not sensitive, I replied, though I could feel the weight of her words. No worries. I won't tell anyone, she said, her tone lightening as she teased me. How often have you faced judgment for your choices? I asked, my voice low, hoping to steer the conversation back to something deeper. Her expression changed, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of vulnerability. I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. Whatever the issue was, it felt like my concern, too. She was right, it was serious, much more serious than I was used to. Typically, I preferred to keep things light and breezy. After all, I was just helping out an old man who had always looked out for both me and my father. My job was simple, make sure she was safe and get her home. About an hour later, we arrived at the parking area behind the main house, nestled next to a few quaint guest cottages reserved for special visitors. Several pools of various sizes dotted the landscape between the cottages, glimmering softly under the stars. It was close to 1 a.m. The older guests had likely drifted off to sleep, while the younger ones might still be reveling in the night. She strolled up to the nearest pool, a modest size, maybe 10 yards long and 5 across, but it was deep, adorned with colorful decorations and charming little sculptures at the bottom. It feels so warm. Let's go in, McCarthy, she exclaimed, her voice bubbling with excitement. Sorry, ma'am, I'm not dressed for that, and honestly, I'm ready to call it a night. I tried to keep my tone light, but she shot me a look that felt like a challenge. If I had been interested, I might have thought twice about jumping in, but luckily, I wasn't. With a playful laugh, she adjusted her clothes, preparing to dive in. The water shimmered enticingly under the soft glow of the lights, and I felt a fleeting twinge of regret that she wasn't someone I was drawn to. Are you sure? She asked, a hint of mischief dancing in her bright eyes. Despite my doubts, I knew I couldn't let her be alone. It was too easy for her to find others to entertain her, and I needed to maintain good standing with Lancaster for looking after his daughter. Suddenly, she splashed water at me, a playful grin on her face. After a few rounds of her antics, I decided to take off my shoes and jumped in after her, clothes and all. It seemed safer than risking an awkward moment with my boss's daughter. She darted to the opposite side of the pool, leaning over the edge and teasing me. Why don't you try to catch me, McCarthy? You're a grown man, and I'm just a girl, she said with a cheeky grin. I treaded water in the center, feeling the weight of my soaked clothes clinging to me. What's wrong? You seem like a strong guy, but it looks like you're facing a bit of a challenge, she taunted, clearly enjoying the moment. As I contemplated her words, I resolved to stay where I was. Not much of an adventurer, am I? I replied, attempting to deflect. You seem more interested in sticking to what you know. Well, I might just call some friends and find a party instead, and then you can explain to my dad why I left. I locked eyes with her, and I could see the spark of defiance in her gaze. I'm not chasing you, Dira. If you want to have more fun in the water, I'm willing to join. But if you want to run off and enjoy the night, that's your choice. I'll just let your father know what you're up to and let him worry about you. If he decides to let me go, that's fine. I can find another job. You're no fun, McCarthy. I'll give you one more chance, just to be fair." With that, she jumped in and swam around me like a playful fish, laughing as she splashed water in my direction. I reached out, grabbed her wrist, and pulled her closer, feeling the thrill of the moment. She giggled, and without much thought, I wrapped my arm around her waist and climbed the ladder, carrying her toward the main house as she kicked and playfully protested. As we walked into the main house, water splashing beneath our feet, her protests turned into a chorus of complaints. Staff members, including butlers, maids, and security, began to gather around us, and when two large men approached to assist her, I gently set her down. Although many people knew me here, she remained the lady of the manor. She turned to speak to a couple of maids who had approached, preparing to leave when suddenly Orion Lancaster, dressed impeccably and rubbing sleep from his eyes, entered the room. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice heavy with concern. "Daddy. He grabbed me and is going to tell you a bunch of lies." "Don't trust him," she exclaimed, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "Michael, can we talk in private? Could your men keep an eye on Dira for a moment?" Orion's tone shifted as he led me into the library, a serious expression settling on his face. Once we were inside, he looked at me intently. "Talk to me." I explained the situation, the worry and surprise evident in his eyes. "She might think she's grown, but she's still his little girl. Honestly, Mr. Lancaster, if she was just having fun, I wouldn't have felt the need to tell you. She's not doing anything that a lot of girls her age don't, but it's concerning that she's getting into risky situations that could have serious consequences. I warned some friends who wanted to spend time with her that mistakes can happen, and sometimes the results can be dire. It's not safe for her to keep going down this road." "Are you sure you're being honest with me?" he asked, his voice low and filled with gravity. "On my father's honor," I replied, my heart racing. At that moment, two security men brought Dira into the library. She looked between us, trying to meet her father's eyes, and I could see she truly was his daughter, with a similar strength radiating from her. "Daddy, I suppose he's tricked you. You believe him without letting me explain." "Just tell me the truth," she insisted, her voice firm. She looked down for a moment, gathering her thoughts before meeting his gaze again. "Okay, I was at a party. I wish I could say I'm still your innocent daughter, but I can't. People grow up. I enjoy friendships, and I like being around men." Orion's expression darkened. "You let your friends take advantage of you in ways that could be risky." Dira stared at me, her surprise palpable. "It's not risky. It's all agreed upon. It's just a fantasy. No one gets hurt. I date nice guys, students and children of people who run big businesses like yours." Orion stared at her in disbelief, and I felt a wave of sympathy wash over me. I was thankful I didn't have children, no one to worry about like he did. "Do you always play it safe during these adventures?" "Mostly," she replied, her bravado faltering under his gaze. His expression shifted as he stepped closer, holding her face gently in his hands. "You are the only piece I have left of your mother. You will inherit a legacy, Dira, and I need you to be careful. You can't afford to take chances with things you don't fully understand." She didn't respond, her defiance crumbling. The atmosphere in the library grew heavy with unspoken words and concerns, and I knew this was only the beginning of a conversation that would change everything for both of them. "You're willing to throw away everything for a bit of fun?" Deirdre's voice was sharp, filled with frustration. "I'm young, and this didn't have to end up like this. You could have let Julian stay with me. He cared for me, and I cared for him. I wouldn't be in this situation if you hadn't scared him away. If you'd let me choose my own partner." Her words hung in the air, heavy with resentment. As she spoke, he gripped her face tighter, causing her to flinch. The choices he made had serious consequences, and he tried to hide that reality. "I didn't scare him away," he insisted, his voice low and tense. "I offered him money to leave you, and he took it. He left because he knew you'd hurt him if he stayed. None of this matters, Deirdre shot back, defiance glimmering in her eyes. "You're under close watch now. Security will follow you everywhere, whether you're going to the bathroom, a movie, or classes. You'll be checked regularly. You can't do this." "I'm over 18, she snapped. "I have rights. I can have you observed for up to 60 days, maybe longer if the tests show you might be a risk to yourself. I can ask a judge to hold you for 6 months in a treatment facility. There won't be any fun activities where you're going. You can stay here and follow my rules, or I'll take steps to limit your freedom." "You would really do that to me?" Deirdre asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "You'd put me through all of this just to make sure you're safe?" "Yes," he said, barely giving her time to process before everything erupted into chaos around them. Luckily, I outweighed her, which made it easy to maintain control. 2 security guards stepped in to separate us, and once the situation calmed down, Mr. Lancaster looked at me. "I know she's upset right now, but she'll come around," he said, his tone suggesting he believed it completely. "Thank you for handling that, it certainly made the evening interesting." I contemplated heading out to my favorite spots to unwind, but in the end, I opted for a shower and an early bed. Anyone I might meet later would pale in comparison to the drama of the night. The following Friday, I had just returned from Miami, where I'd spent 4 days chasing rumors about an undiscovered oil field that could potentially wreak havoc in Miami Beach. It seemed like yet another false lead, just another frustrating day in the oil business. I managed only a brief meeting with a bilingual Cuban woman who was adept at sharing her ideas in both English and Spanish. After surviving on only about 12 hours of sleep in 4 days, I was relying heavily on coffee to stay awake. My bed looked incredibly inviting. As I settled into my condo on the Lancaster estate, I heard a knock at the door. "Please go away, I'm off the clock," I muttered, but the knocking persisted. I figured it might be Orion, but I wasn't sure. When I opened the door, I found Deirdre standing there, flanked by 2 friendly-looking women who seemed to be there for protection. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my annoyance in check. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. McCarthy, but Miss Lancaster would like to see you," said the shorter blonde, her eyes darting nervously. It was clear this wasn't the most thrilling job they ever had. "What do you want?" I asked Deirdre. "I'm sorry for how I acted the last time we met," she said, guilt creeping into her voice. "Can we move on from that?" "Why should we?" I countered, crossing my arms. "I need a favor," she said, biting her lip. "I shouldn't ask, but can we go get a drink at Jack's Beach? There are some really great bands playing tonight." "Are you serious? You think I would risk taking you out and losing you?" I replied, incredulous. "I promise I won't try to run away," she pleaded, her eyes wide and earnest. "That means a lot to me. The people who take me out don't know any good music after 1995, and they aren't much fun. It's nicer to stay in and read." I glanced at the security women. "Is this okay with Mr. Lancaster?" "They told us they trust you," one of them replied, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. Exhaustion pulled at me, and my bed was incredibly tempting. I wasn't sure why I agreed to go out, but something about the sparkle in Deirdre's eyes compelled me. This decision would lead to unexpected changes in my life. We drove down from St. Augustine on US 1, the traffic growing heavier as we neared Jack's Beach. When we finally reached the beach area, navigating through the crowd took forever. After paying a guy $50 for a parking spot near the beach, we finally emerged just 2 blocks away from a line of bars and concert venues, each one alive with different bands. I didn't hold on to Deirdre, but she stayed close as we entered the first bar. It was packed and vibrant, filled with laughter and music. After a few drinks and listening to several bands I'd never heard of before but found surprisingly enjoyable, Deirdre leaned over and said, "I need to use the restroom." "Sure," I replied, watching as she navigated through the crowd. I left a couple of 20s on the bar to cover our bill and stepped outside. Wandering around to the back, I headed up the alley that stretched the length of the block. I faced some tense moments but stayed calm as the people around me continued with their own activities. As I reached the back of the bar, a tall guy with messy blonde hair spotted me and raised his hands dramatically. "Leave now," he warned. "She won't be available tonight if you don't go away. This could lead to trouble." I moved closer and gently tapped him on the nose. He dropped to his knees, looking surprised. "Get lost," I said, helping him up and sending him on his way. A few moments later, a young woman with brown hair and a short skirt came out, scanning the area. I quietly approached her. "Hi, Deirdre. Your friend is gone." As I spoke, I quietly slipped one handcuff onto her wrist and the other onto my own. "What? McCarthy, what are you doing?" she exclaimed, eyes wide with shock. "I'm handcuffing you," I said, my tone firm but light. "You wanted to have a fun night, and this way I don't have to worry about you wandering off." "Really? I know this place well," she protested, pulling at the cuff. "Were you really planning to leave without saying anything?" "No," I replied, shaking my head. "He thought we'd leave together, but I just wanted a fun night without feeling held back." "Now, I guess you're taking me home." "Why would I do that?" I asked, my brow furrowing. "You know the handcuffs mean I can't just leave." "It's your choice," she said defiantly. "We can go home, or—" I looked at her, a mix of frustration and amusement crossing my face. "Or what? You'll have to explain to your father why you were handcuffed on the way home?" Deirdre rolled her eyes but couldn't help a smile. "Fine. Let's go home," she said, her voice softer now. And so began the unexpected turn of events that would change everything. I wasn't sure what the night would bring, but I knew one thing: with Deirdre Lancaster in my life, nothing would ever be the same again. "We can enjoy some more music and drinks," Deirdre suggested, a playful glint in her eyes. "That sounds fun to me," I replied, "but really, it's up to you. Just know the handcuffs stay on." "Okay then," she laughed, her enthusiasm infectious. We headed back inside, the lively sounds of the bar wrapping around us as we settled into the rhythm of the night. The drinks flowed as we listened to a variety of bands, and before long, Deirdre managed to persuade me to join her on the dance floor. As we danced, she raised her arms playfully, showcasing the handcuffs. The sight drew attention, and soon cheers and laughter erupted around us, adding to the vibrant atmosphere. "I need a pair of those," someone shouted, followed by a chorus of playful comments that echoed in the air. We danced our way from bar to bar, losing track of time amidst the laughter and music. Finally, as the clock struck 4 a.m., I felt my eyelids growing heavy. "I'm ready to go," I told her, suppressing a yawn. "We need to leave, or you'll have to carry me out of here." To my surprise, she didn't argue. A half-hour later, we arrived back at my place, where I had called ahead, and two blonde security guards were waiting outside as I parked the car. Once inside, I unfastened the handcuffs, a grin spreading across my face. "That was fun," I said, watching Deirdre's hair swirl around her face, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "I'm glad you had a good time," she replied, but then her eyes grew heavy. "Now, please let me get some sleep." "Okay," I nodded, but before she could head out, she leaned in for a soft, shy kiss. The moment felt electric, something different from what I'd experienced before. Then, she opened the door and walked over to the guards, leaving me standing there, bewildered but intrigued. I went back inside, barely managing to make my bed. I didn't even change out of my clothes before collapsing into bed, sleep pulling me under almost immediately. Yet, just before I drifted off, an unsettling feeling washed over me. Something had shifted, but I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. A nagging thought whispered that it wouldn't end well. For the next 2 weeks, I didn't see her. Sometimes she would pop into my mind, but I couldn't figure out how I truly felt about her. One Saturday morning, feeling restless and lost, I drove to St. Augustine Beach. The sun kissed my skin as I walked along the dunes, but I felt like I was searching for something I couldn't define. Later, I returned to the Lancaster estate for dinner. The meal was exquisite, fall-off-the-bone ribs, roasted asparagus, and the best crab cakes I'd ever tasted. Lancaster always made sure that everyone on his estate enjoyed a remarkable meal. Afterward, I retreated to my room, sipping good bourbon from the bar. Thanks to Lancaster's hospitality, I didn't feel like watching TV or having company. It was strange, but sometimes everyone deserves a quiet night. Then, there was a knock at the door. I suspected who it was, but I wasn't in the mood to go out. I knew I wouldn't be good company tonight. When I opened the door, there she was, standing in bright red shorts and a matching top, radiating energy. In one hand, she held a paper bag, and in the other, a stack of DVDs. I glanced around and noticed her team lurking nearby, trying to stay out of sight. "I'm not up for a night out, Deirdre," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's not a good night for me." "That's fine," she replied, unfazed. I didn't want to go out either. I was hoping we could just hang out and watch some DVDs. I hesitated, uncertain. "I'm not sure about that. I promised to keep it easy. I'm bored." "Maybe if you join me, it'll change things up," she insisted. Against my better judgment, I relented. "Okay, come on in." We settled in and spent the evening watching 2 movies that wouldn't be released until next year, laughing at the ones that missed the mark. I found that when she wasn't being demanding or flirting with everyone in sight, she was actually pretty nice. At some point during the night, she leaned against me, clearly comfortable, and I couldn't help but feel a flutter of warmth. I didn't know when it happened, but it did. I gently took her hand and said, "Let's not cross any lines here." She looked up at me, her green eyes sparkling in the dim light, catching me off guard. "Why not?" she asked, a hint of mischief in her voice. I couldn't find a solid answer, so I stayed silent. A little while later, she began to tease me playfully, and I felt flattered by her attention. I had been through a lot in my life, but in that moment, I felt like I was experiencing something special. We took a break, and I noticed that the restlessness that had plagued me all day had faded. Maybe it was the bourbon, or perhaps it was simply the moment, but I had a feeling it was because of her. Trying to focus, I managed to say, "This doesn't really make sense. You're not my usual type. People like you don't usually catch my interest." "You had me fooled," she replied with a smile, her eyes dancing with playfulness. "Wait, I don't get it, what is going on?" Suddenly, she sat on top of me, and I couldn't help but notice the way her hair swirled around us, seemingly moving in strange patterns despite the air conditioning. "I shouldn't tell you this, but I will," she said, leaning in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I've put a spell on you. Think of it as an Irish love spell. My dad used to say we had ancestors from the Tuatha Dé Danann, the Celtic gods of Ireland, before Christianity. He said sometimes I could use magic." Her green eyes sparkled in the low light, captivating me. "I have put a spell on you, and you will be mine forever. You will be my partner until the very end." The rest of the night faded into warm memories of togetherness, then darkness enveloped me. I woke up Sunday morning to find a cozy figure next to me. Carefully, I got out of bed to use the bathroom. When I returned, Deirdre was awake, watching me with a curious expression. "Are you sorry you didn't go out?" she asked, a teasing smile playing on her lips. "No," I replied, shaking my head. "But I have to admit, you caught me off guard." "How?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. I didn't know I was spending the night with someone who said they had magic. She thought about it for a moment, then burst into laughter. "You believed all of that about the spell and the Tuatha Dé Danann? It was pretty impressive, though. Your hair moving around and your eyes shining, it was all just a bit of fun." I chuckled, unable to shake the lingering feeling of disbelief. I suppose being a bit out of it had nothing to do with it. "I'm surprised you didn't see any leprechauns or fairies. I've heard stories about the Tuatha Dé Danann since I was little," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "I was just playing around with you." She got up and walked toward me, her confidence radiating. "Does that mean you really think you're in love with me?" "Don't push it," I warned, still shocked that we had ended up in this situation. She turned to start putting on her clothes. "All right, but next time, you're going to have to come after me. I won't be the one chasing you again." As she walked away, I couldn't help but smile, already anticipating what would come next. It was an ordinary day when I received a call from El Castor, though I had anticipated it. The moment I stepped into the large room, I was struck by the expansive swimming pool, its glass walls offering a stunning view of the marshes that stretched behind the main house. I recalled hearing stories about the oyster beds that used to thrive there, now long gone, a ghost of the past. I had no idea what would unfold next. I didn't feel ashamed about what had happened, but there was a heaviness in my chest knowing she was his daughter. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair by the pool. I took a seat, feeling his gaze on me as he studied me for a moment. "I know what happened," he said finally. "But I'm unsure what it means." "Neither do I," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. "It's definitely physical, but she has really gotten under my skin. I told her she's not my type, yet I can't stop thinking about her, more than I ever expected." "I'm not going to say you shouldn't see her," he said, his tone surprisingly understanding. "Honestly, I trust her with you more than anyone else I can think of. I'm not sure you'll take advantage of her, but please do your best not to hurt her." "Maybe you should say that to her," I suggested. "I think I can take care of myself." "I used to think so," he said, a shadow passing over his face. Fast forward 2 years later, it was early 2004, and Orion had passed away a year prior from a sudden stroke. Deirdre and I had been married for 2 years, and she had truly gotten under my skin. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had fallen for someone who defied my expectations. I had always thought that marriage meant I could keep a woman or two on the side. I could never picture myself being satisfied with just one. But here I was, in a reality I hadn't foreseen. While we might not spend every night together when I was home, it was rare for us to go 3 days without being close. My travels took me away often, but coming home always felt special. Life was good, even if it was different from what I had envisioned. I had a wife who meant more to me now than I could have imagined, and I began to realize I wanted kids. Starting a family felt like a way to honor both of our families, especially now that we were both without parents. But so far, we hadn't had much luck. We kept trying, and while it was a nice experience, there was something beneath the surface that I couldn't quite identify. I sensed that I had been away from home too much. I had already planned a month-long getaway for us when I returned, envisioning us lounging on a tropical island, swimming, and enjoying each other's company all day and night. But while I was in a part of Russia I'd rather not mention, I received an urgent call from one of Deirdre's assistants, Mr. McCarthy. "I don't know how to say this," he started, his tone grave. "Miss Lancaster has been in an accident." "What kind of accident? Is she okay?" My heart raced. "It's an automobile accident. She crashed into a power pole on I-295. "When did this happen?" "The night before last. 2 days ago." "Why didn't anyone contact me? Was she driving herself?" Silence hung heavy on the other end of the line. "Why wasn't I informed? Is she hurt?" More silence. "What's going on? Are my questions that difficult to answer? Please tell me, is she badly hurt?" "We were told not to reach out to you," he finally admitted. "Who decided that?" I felt a cold anger rising. "I'm afraid it was my decision," came the reply. "It was Daniel Goldman, Deirdre's main assistant. I had seen him many times over the past year since Orion's death. Deirdre owned the company completely, there was no board of directors. However, she wasn't familiar with all the business matters, and Goldman had worked for her father for 5 years before his death. He managed the daily operations. He was a tough man, but we usually got along." "You didn't inform me about my wife's accident. Who do you think you are? She's my wife. I manage Lancaster Oil according to her wishes, and I am also responsible for her well-being, he stated firmly. I decided not to notify you. Why would you keep me from knowing how she is? I won't discuss that. I had my reasons. A doctor suggested it would be best for her not to see you, and she asked for that, too. That's hard to believe. It's true, Michael. She doesn't want to see you. If you keep working on your current project, you'll keep your pay, but if you try to come back, all your benefits with Lancaster Oil will be taken away. You'll be left with nothing. Think about trying to leave the Soviet republics without money or help. I don't know what you're trying to achieve, Daniel, but this is a big mistake you will regret. Don't try to return. Things may change, and I will explain everything later. You will understand. But if you attempt to go back to Deirdre, we will stop you. I hung up, feeling the walls closing in around me. Within half an hour, I learned that all my company privileges had been frozen. I could try to borrow money from friends, but they might stop me too. In desperation, I reached out to a government acquaintance who had recently come into some money due to a rumor about a new oil field and called in a favor. An hour later, I found myself boarding a private jet, soaring over oceans, first the Mediterranean, then the Atlantic, heading south to Cuba. After a brief stop at a Cuban airfield, I took a helicopter to a Norwegian ship headed for Miami. A short flight on a private plane landed me at a small airfield in North Jacksonville, where a rental car was waiting for me. It's good to have connections. I called Goldman. It was 9 a.m. Where are you? Just checking in. I'm back in Jacksonville. I need to see her. I deserve to know what's happening. You might not want to, Michael. Trust me, just give it a few days, and I'll explain everything. Okay. I'll see you at the hospital. I ended the call, frustration boiling beneath the surface. By 11 a.m., someone introduced himself as Michael McCarthy and went to the third floor, searching for Miss Lancaster's room. At 11:05, another person claiming to be Michael McCarthy entered the hospital, somehow managing to avoid security while searching for Miss Lancaster. Then, at 11:10, a third Michael McCarthy appeared. The atmosphere inside Lancaster Hospital was thick with tension as chaos erupted at 11:20. A nurse hurried in, wheeling a patient in an oxygen mask into the Lancaster room. Almost immediately, the security team swooped in, surrounding her while she stammered apologies about a mix-up. Meanwhile, I sat up, my heart racing, and peeled the oxygen mask off my face, inching closer to the nearest security guard. If everyone stays calm, there's no need to be alarmed, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the tumult around me. Please step away from my wife. Daniel stood by her bedside, clearly taken aback. I caught a glimpse of her through the chaos. Though her face was wrapped in bandages, I could see her vibrant red hair peeking out. Our eyes locked, and I felt a surge of relief mixed with worry as I read the surprise and concern in her gaze. Deirdre, what's going on? Daniel's voice was thick with urgency. You didn't want to see me. Please, talk to me. Even if your face got hurt in the accident, it doesn't matter. I love you. My stomach churned as I noticed a tall man beside her, holding her hand. I recognized him from a photo I'd seen years ago, long hair, a diamond stud in his ear. He seemed charming, nothing like an English tutor, and there he was, grasping my wife's hand while I felt utterly powerless to enter her room. Something was off, and I could sense it. Gutman, please step away from my wife, I demanded, my frustration bubbling to the surface. 3 security guards flanked the one who had noticed me first, and I could see Daniel signaling them to close in on me. Don't be reckless, Michael, Daniel warned, his voice low and urgent. Any sudden moves could make things worse. Don't risk your life over this. You might be right, I thought, but I was past the point of backing down. I managed to push aside the guard in front of me, and as another swung a punch my way, I dodged and grabbed his wrist, redirecting him onto a gurney that rolled away with a squeal. Confusion erupted around us, escalating the tension in the air. The larger guard charged at me, arms outstretched, attempting to tackle me to the ground. I sidestepped him, my heart pounding in my chest, only to see the last security guard moving in with purpose. I faked a move left, then braced myself to defend against whatever was coming next. Suddenly, there was a stillness, a heavy silence as everyone paused, the weight of the moment hanging over us. "Don't, Michael," Daniel urged, raising his hands to signal everyone to stay back. "As long as you keep everyone away, I won't do anything hasty." "I feel trapped," I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "You can't keep me away from my wife. I don't understand why this is happening." "Maybe I can explain," came a voice from behind me. I turned to see a tall man dressed sharply, radiating authority. He wasn't in hospital scrubs, and his presence immediately signaled he held a significant role. "I'm Dr. Mayfair, your wife's psychiatrist, Mr. McCarthy. 2 nights ago, she suffered a serious head injury in a car accident. While her face may heal quickly, she has a concussion, and, as we've discovered, a type of amnesia." "Amnesia?" The word felt like a punch to the gut. "Yes," Dr. Mayfair continued, "a specific kind. She knows who she is and retains many important memories, but she has lost the last 3 years of her life, including details about her marriage and the loss of her father. She doesn't remember any of that." A sense of disbelief washed over me. That's right. She forgot about me. But she's known me for a lot longer than 3 years. You must have told her that we've been married for 2 years. I'm afraid she doesn't remember you from before. She saw your picture and was told about what happened, but her reaction was not good, the doctor explained. You have to understand, she woke up to a world that is very different from what she remembers. She became so upset that I suggested we wait a few days, maybe a week, before allowing you to see her. This would give her time to adjust to her new reality. Too much stress could worsen her memory issues. Daniel's expression shifted as he reached for the item he had been holding. "Could you take that away from me?" he asked, his voice strained. "I know you, Michael. You wouldn't stay away if I told you the doctor advised it," Daniel replied, his tone softer. "I thought that if we kept you away for a while, it might help her adjust. But I see now that I underestimated your determination." Dr. Mayfair interjected, "Michael, even though you're upset right now, I hope you understand this was for her own good. She needs time to heal." I turned back to Deirdre, my heart aching. "Is this true, Deirdre? You don't remember me? Thinking about me is making you upset?" "Yes, Mr. McCarthy," she said, her voice trembling. "They told me we were married and showed me pictures, but it doesn't feel real. I don't remember you or how we got together. I can't understand why I married you. I don't see any connection between us." Her words hit me like ice water. I watched her close her eyes, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Please, get him out of here," she said, panic rising in her tone. "Mayfair, we need to leave," Daniel urged, looking genuinely worried. "Okay, but Deirdre, they told me you don't remember me at all after you woke up. Is that true?" He pressed, desperation creeping into his voice. She opened her eyes, looking straight at him. "No, I have no memory of you at all." The finality of her words shattered me. I handed the item to Daniel and allowed the security staff to escort me out of the room. Outside, I found officers waiting for me, their expressions a mix of concern and authority. Daniel waved his hand to get their attention. "This was just a small misunderstanding, gentlemen. There's no problem here, and I apologize for calling you out," he said, his voice calm but firm. Once the officers left, Daniel turned to me, his expression unreadable. "I'm going to keep this," he said, pointing to the item in his hand. "But I know you can come up with more. You're free to go, but if you return to the hospital, I'll have to ask you to leave." I nodded, still reeling from what had just happened. My heart felt heavy as I stepped into the hallway, the sterile scent of antiseptic and the echo of hurried footsteps surrounding me. My world had just shifted beneath my feet, and I didn't know how to navigate the chaos that lay ahead. Due to your violation of our rules, you're no longer welcome at the Lancaster estate. You will be escorted off the property, and your employment with Lancaster Oil has been terminated. Your final paycheck will be sent to you. I'm sure you'll find new opportunities elsewhere. I shook his hand, trying to mask the storm of emotions brewing inside me. I appreciate you not taking any immediate action and letting me go. Please keep me updated if anything changes, or if Dira's memory returns. You'll be the first to know. As I left the hospital, 3 security guards flanked me, their presence a stark reminder of my current situation. I glanced back once, feeling the weight of defeat settle on my shoulders. Everything seemed to conspire against me, yet amidst the turmoil, I held on to a glimmer of hope. I knew Dira wasn't being entirely honest. Her story about amnesia felt like a facade. I wished I could convince myself otherwise, that she truly had forgotten, and that the Dira I loved might return someday. But reality hit hard, that hope felt like a distant dream now, and I had to prepare to live my life alone. June 4, 2004. The sign over the 3-story building, located 2 blocks north of the courthouse and 2 blocks east of the police station, read Bailey, Devon, Martin and Wills in bold golden letters. There was a running joke among the workers at Lancaster Oil that the letters were made of real gold. Bailey and Wills were 2 of the oldest and most prestigious law firms in Jacksonville, having earned a fortune over nearly 30 years by representing Lancaster and his oil company. Mort Bailey had been a close friend of Lancaster's before his passing and had also been Dira's godfather, so I knew what I was getting into. I had received several emails and a friendly phone call from a female associate, inviting me to discuss the situation regarding Dira in a casual, relaxed setting. I suspected they had intentions to ask me questions carefully, and I anticipated a challenging conversation. Before exiting my 2003 Jeep Liberty, I made a few quick phone calls to prepare. Once finished, I stepped out and locked my car, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. This part of Jacksonville was densely populated with lawyers, and the air felt thick with tension. Despite the presence of law enforcement and legal professionals, crime and safety concerns loomed large, making it unwise to walk alone at night unless you were one of them. Keeping my car locked was imperative. As I walked through the front door, the scent of money and law books enveloped me. A woman in a deep red dress caught my eye and smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, sir. Can I help you?" I smiled back, even though she was technically on the opposing side. "I'm here to see Mr. Bailey or someone from his team. I'm Michael McCarthy." Her smile faded for a moment before she replied, "Oh, of course, Mr. McCarthy. They're waiting for you in the conference room on the 3rd floor." She signaled to someone nearby, and a tall man approached. He looked sharp and serious, not the friendly type I was used to seeing. I'd encountered his kind in tough places around the world, but I hadn't expected to find him here in Jacksonville. "If you don't mind," he said, motioning for me to lift my arms, "I need to conduct a security check." "And if I do mind?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "That would be unfortunate, sir. My job is to ensure safety in the building, and I can't let you proceed without checking for any items of concern." "Really?" "Yes, really. There have been incidents where clients reacted poorly to their attorneys or their teams. It's necessary to check everyone." I reluctantly raised my arms and allowed him to inspect me. He pulled out a few items, scrutinized them, and then returned them to me. Turning around, I allowed him to check my back as well. "Please follow me, sir," he instructed. I trailed behind him to an elevator that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. He pressed the button, and the doors opened just seconds later. The ride was short, and when we stepped out, we found ourselves in a hallway adorned with tranquil landscape paintings. As I walked through, the serene imagery made me think of running through fields of flowers on a sunny day. I figured no angry client could stay upset after a stroll through such a calming corridor. My guide paused at another door and pointed. I opened it and stepped inside, halting mid-stride. The expansive room featured a large oval table that could comfortably seat 26 people, 12 on each side, plus 2 at either end. The polished wood gleamed under the overhead lights, but it wasn't the table that made me stop, it was the sight of 15 chairs already occupied. At one end of the table sat Mort Bailey, flanked by Billy Wills. Dira was on his other side, her gaze fixated on the polished surface of the table. 12 more individuals filled the remaining chairs, and if this was how Bailey and Wills called an informal meeting, I could only imagine what a formal one would look like. Bailey gestured for me to sit at the far end of the table. I pulled out the chair and sat down, making a weak attempt at humor. I feel like Custer at that infamous meeting at Little Bighorn. Bailey remained serious. I appreciate your attempt to lighten the mood, Mr. McCarthy, but this is a serious situation, and a serious meeting. I hoped that meeting outside of a formal setting would allow us to discuss how to solve this problem in a way that works for everyone, someplace where no one is taking notes and nothing is officially recorded. He looked at Dira, and I sensed a quiet understanding pass between them. She met his gaze before briefly looking at me, trying to maintain a calm facade, but I could feel an undercurrent of tension. Maybe I was imagining things. She glanced down again. Exactly, Mr. McCarthy. Speaking honestly can help with many tricky issues. Well, I'm here. Let's have a conversation. Before we began, Bailey interjected, Mr. Harper Stevens mentioned you have a couple of devices with you, one seems to be a recorder, and the other a cell phone that can also record. To help us speak freely, I'd like you to hand those over to one of our assistants during this meeting. I hesitated. They're not recording anything, and you can see that. I didn't know we'd be discussing anything sensitive here today. Those devices stay with me, or I leave, your choice. Your attitude isn't what we expected. But as you said, we won't be talking about anything overly sensitive. At any rate, I appreciate your cooperation. The tension in the room grew thicker, and I knew that the conversation ahead would shape the course of our lives forever. Are you really willing to just jump right in? Bailey asked, her tone challenging yet curious. Let's do that. You know your wife wants to end your marriage. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. I know she's been unhappy for a while, but that doesn't mean she wants a divorce. Bailey locked eyes with me for a moment, and then she glanced down, her expression serious. She told you she wanted a divorce 2 months ago. Again a month ago, and just last week. How much clearer could she be? When she looked up again, I met her gaze. Those eyes had once sparkled with warmth for me, and I secretly hoped that flicker of affection still lingered somewhere beneath the surface. But I couldn't deny what was right in front of me. Deirdre's beautiful face bore the scars of an accident that had irrevocably changed our lives. No, Michael, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in it. Whether you believe it or not, I didn't fall in love with you. I didn't marry you. I didn't spend 2 good years as your wife. You know you did, I countered, my heart racing. It doesn't matter if you like it or not, it's a fact. Her voice shook momentarily, but she regained her composure. No. What you say and what others say don't matter to me. I've seen the pictures from our wedding, but none of that is real for me. I never truly met you. I never fell in love with you. For me, it all didn't happen. It's not real. The silence hung heavy between us as she continued, not remembering doesn't change what's true. It doesn't erase a marriage. It removes love. I don't know you, I said, frustration creeping into my voice. When you're close to me, it feels unfamiliar. How can you expect me to feel that way about you when we haven't shared those special moments together? This feels like a dream I can't escape. I just want this to end so I can get back to my real life. Mr. McCarthy, Wills, the other senior partner, interjected. His voice carried the weight of long-held traditions. Whether you were married before or not, it's pretty clear you're not married now. Maybe legally you're right, I shot back, but in real life, there is a marriage here. I thought lawyers were supposed to believe in the law. Bailey shook his head, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Lawyers don't just believe in the law, Mr. McCarthy. We believe in our clients. The law is simply a tool we use to support their needs. It seems to me that if you were truly looking out for your client, you'd encourage her to see a counselor, to find the best help to unlock her memories. That's your idea of what's best for Miss Lancaster, I replied. She thinks her best choice is to end this and go back to her old life. Bailey pressed his fingers together and looked at me across the long table made of polished wood. Honestly, Mr. McCarthy, this meeting is meant to show respect for your position. I get your feelings. If I were in your shoes and about to lose someone who looks like my wife but feels different, I would fight just as hard to keep her. But the hard truth is, you don't really have a say in this. Florida is a no-fault state. If Miss Lancaster wants a divorce, she will get it. You can resist, but you won't win. I will still fight it, I asserted, determination coursing through me. Why? Because I love her. Because she is my wife. Amnesia is complicated, and what if she gets her memories back after marrying someone else? That would hurt. And because I don't like losing. Call it focus, but I want to keep what is mine. No matter what they say about Florida's laws, it only works that way if you give in. If I keep fighting, if I create obstacles, I can delay it. The longer I delay, the better chance I have of her memories coming back. Bailey passed a folder to the attorney sitting beside Deirdre. He handed it over to me. This is the report from Dr. Herbert Mayfair, the psychiatrist who has treated Deirdre since the accident. I don't know if you've looked at Dr. Mayfair's report, Bailey said, leaning back in his chair, but I have. Please humor an old man. Dr. Mayfair has been a respected psychiatrist in Jacksonville for 15 years. I had already read his findings, but I opened the folder and skimmed through the pages again. Toward the end, I found a summary that sent chills down my spine. My investigation, along with medical information from the accident to now, leads me to believe that Miss Lancaster has suffered serious brain injury, which likely explains her memory loss over the past 3 years. After the traffic accident on March 17, she was taken to St. Vincent with swelling in her brain from hitting the front windshield of her vehicle. This swelling and injury could have damaged her memory. While there are no signs of ongoing brain problems, the initial injury could lead to long-lasting memory loss even after her physical health improves. As I continued to read, my heart sank further. There may also be emotional factors at play. Based on what Miss Lancaster remembers and what others have said, she did not have a relationship with Mr. McCarthy before the last 3 years and seemed hesitant about marrying him, feeling pressured by her father. If this is true, she might not want to remember that time in her life. In summary, Bailey continued, I believe trying to recover her lost memories is very unlikely to succeed. It may also harm her overall emotional well-being. As you can see, he added, it's doubtful your wife's memories will return, or that they should. Many experts will tell you that memory loss is very complicated. Are you ready to risk your wife's happiness based on a slim chance that Dr. Mayfair considers unlikely? I could have argued that Deirdre might have felt differently during our marriage, that perhaps she had been putting on an act, but I really didn't believe that. Still, I wanted to keep the conversation going. I picked up my phone and pressed a button as the others at the table looked at me, confused. It's time. Come upstairs. Bailey started to ask, what? But I cut him off, my mind racing with thoughts of Deirdre and the life we could still build together if only she could remember. Hold on a second, McCarthy, I interrupted, cutting him off before he could finish. You didn't say I had to come alone. I want someone with me. Bailey looked surprised for a moment, then turned to his colleague. Go downstairs and bring whoever it is. You can send him up, but honestly, it's probably pointless. No one will see him as a threat, and if he interacts with your colleague, it could lead to legal issues. Without missing a beat, Bailey picked up the phone on the table, dialed a number, and listened intently. His frown deepened. "Send him upstairs. He doesn't need anyone with him," he said firmly. Turning back to his colleague, he added, "It's all right. Head downstairs and continue your work." A moment later, a tall man with dark hair entered the room. His sharp features and strong gaze commanded attention, and he exuded confidence. He had an air about him that suggested he belonged in a serious role. His eyes seemed to absorb every detail around him, and even if I hadn't known he was a psychologist, it was clear he was an expert in his field. "Dr. Teller," he introduced himself, taking a seat next to me. "Mr. Bailey," he nodded at them both. "Can I ask why you're here today, Dr. Teller?" "This isn't an official meeting, it's just a discussion between Mr. McCarthy and some of our staff about his situation with Miss Lancaster." Teller turned to me, then back to Bailey. "I'm not sure why you need your legal team for a simple chat, but Mr. McCarthy wanted me here in case there were questions about Mrs. McCarthy's mental condition. By the way, I'm curious, why do you call her Miss Lancaster? She is still legally married to Mr. McCarthy." "It's a personal choice, Dr. Teller," Bailey replied. In her mind, Miss Lancaster is almost single again. "The next steps are just a formality." "We appreciate your input," Bailey continued, "but I know you've seen Dr. Mayfair's report on Miss Lancaster. Both you and Dr. Mayfair are respected in your fields. Regardless of your views, we believe we have enough evidence for a judge to decide that Miss Lancaster cannot be kept in a marriage she believes doesn't exist." Teller rubbed his chin thoughtfully, as if contemplating a deeper issue. "You know about my report and my discussion with Mrs. McCarthy. You're aware of my findings that there's no ongoing trauma or brain injury causing any memory issues. The term amnesia is broad and can refer to many types of memory problems, but it lacks meaning unless clarified further." He pulled out Mayfair's report and flipped through it. "My review of her hospital records and scans showed some initial swelling of the brain, which is typical after a serious accident. However, there's no evidence of severe issues that would lead to memory loss, especially for a specific time frame. There are no signs of ongoing swelling or other stress." He continued, "As for Dr. Mayfair's opinion that there could be emotional reasons for the memory loss, that's an easy conclusion to reach and very hard to dismiss. It seems to support the idea of amnesia when there's no other clear proof." "That's your viewpoint, Dr. Teller," Wilkes interjected smoothly. "While you are a respected psychiatrist, I'm sure you know that people have different opinions." Leaning in closer, Teller lowered his voice. "There's a reason people say certain things about lawyers. Wilkes likes to challenge witnesses, and he can do a lot today." He looked directly at Wilkes before continuing, "You're right, an opinion is just that, an opinion, not a fact. After speaking with many people in serious cases, I believe Mrs. McCarthy is not being honest." Teller fixed his gaze on Deirdre until she looked up at him. Typically calm and composed, there was something in her eyes, fear, doubt, perhaps even vulnerability, that caught my attention. I would usually stop my comments here, any further remarks might be out of place. Yet since this seems to be an open discussion, I must say, Mrs. McCarthy, I truly doubt your claims about memory loss regarding your husband. Before Wilkes could respond, Teller added, "While it may be hard to find a clear answer about her truthfulness, there's a way to at least check if her words hold up." Bailey quickly took Deirdre's hand, and her response was so instant that it was clear she was reacting to his touch. "Miss Lancaster has the right to refuse any lie detector test, Dr. Teller. You know these tests are not allowed in court because they aren't always accurate. Given the emotional stress in this situation, they would be even less trustworthy. While they might not provide clear answers, many people in similar situations take these tests just to support their claims of innocence. If Mrs. McCarthy were to take such a test, it could help back up her claim of honesty. Why not take a lie detector test, Deirdre?" I asked, hoping to catch her attention. "What do you have to lose? As Bailey said, if you want a divorce, you'll probably get one regardless of what I do. If I could truly believe your story, I might consider other options. There will be no lie detector tests, Bailey interjected firmly. Deirdre looked at me, sadness etched in her features. Why don't you believe me? Let me go so we can both move on. I can't believe you because you've said too many things that aren't true, I shot back. Mr. McCarthy, please remember this meeting was also set up for your benefit, to help you find a reasonable settlement that could save you a lot in legal costs. Any more comments like that, and we might have to rethink continuing, Wilkes warned, clearly enjoying his role as the tough guy in the conversation. I stood up and pushed my chair back, echoing Teller's earlier action. Gentlemen, it's been real. See you in court, I said, ready to walk out. Bailey signaled for me to sit back down. Mr. McCarthy, let's stay calm. We won't help anyone if we let our tempers flare. I took a deep breath, glancing at Deirdre, who looked torn between frustration and sadness. The tension in the room was palpable, and I knew we were at a crossroads. Whether we were here to settle matters or dive deeper into this quagmire, only time would tell. But as I sat back down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much more complicated journey ahead. Our emotions were running high as everyone settled into their seats. Listen up, everyone, I said, trying to maintain a level tone despite the tension in the air. We need to talk about some important matters today. It's best if we can get a lot done to save time and avoid any hurt feelings. Bailey had done a commendable job of keeping things steady, but I knew I held the upper hand. I could voice my frustrations, and they wouldn't let me just walk away. They needed my agreement more than I needed anything from them. Mr. McCarthy, one of the lawyers interjected, while my colleague may have been a bit forceful, there's really no need to accuse anyone of lying. Whatever the truth is, it won't affect a divorce case. You're mistaken, I shot back, my frustration bubbling to the surface. My wife has lied about significant things, and I'm not in a cooperating mood because I want those lies to come out. Mr. McCarthy, even if it feels satisfying to bring up issues from your marriage, it won't help anyone, he countered. It helps keep me here, I said, leaning forward. You called me here, and the longer I stay, the more I feel you want something from me. Let's be open about everything. He leaned over to whisper something to Wilkes, and I could sense the shifting dynamics. All right, Mr. McCarthy, he said after a moment. We'll give you the space you need. If we discuss these matters openly, we could avoid a lot of trouble. Go ahead. I picked up my phone and dialed a number, feeling a mix of determination and uncertainty. Then I leaned back, watching Deirdre as she shifted her focus from Bailey to Wilkes, then to the silver-haired attorney and a female lawyer, but she never looked my way. 5 minutes later, Earl Wilson entered the room. He was dressed casually in gray slacks and a crisp white shirt, shiny black shoes glimmering as he walked. He sat across from me, placing a briefcase on the table with a certain gravity. This is Mr. Earl Wilson from Wilson Investigations, he announced. I won't list his qualifications because you likely know about his work. When I returned and heard about Deirdre's accident, I had been curious. She was determined and strong-willed, but never reckless behind the wheel. Her father had ensured she received excellent defensive driving training as a teenager. Anyone from a wealthy family must always consider risks like kidnapping or other threats, especially when driving. I can confirm she is a skilled driver, I continued, glancing at Wilson. And I'm no novice myself. Finally, Deirdre met my gaze with a look of understanding, and I felt a flicker of hope. I hired Mr. Wilson to look into the accident and my wife's actions before and after it, I stated firmly. I'll allow him to continue. Wilson opened his briefcase and pulled out some papers and photos. I've reviewed the accident report, along with photos and diagrams. For some reason, it was difficult to obtain these images and diagrams. Claims were made that they were lost. But I managed to get them and have copies ready for you if you want to see them.